Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. On behalf of the Environmental Finance Center Network, welcome to today's webinar, Better Together, How WIFIA and SRFs Can Power Your Water Infrastructure Projects. My name is Zoe Eisel from the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center. Before we begin, we're going to go over a few logistics and then we can get started. During the webinar today, everyone will be kept on mute to ensure audio quality. If you have a question, please type it into the GoToWebinar question box anytime throughout the session. We will be saving your questions for a facilitated Q&A session at the end of the presentation. GoToWebinar has recently gone through an update, and you can now add live captions, raise your hand, or react using emojis. After the webinar, you will receive a follow-up email that includes a link to the recording and any other information you may need. You can also download the slides from today in the Handouts tab or Materials tab in your GoToWebinar control panel. This webinar has not been submitted for pre-approval of continuing education credits, but eligible attendees will receive a certificate of attendance for their personal record. To receive a certificate for this session, you must attend for the entire session and register and attend individually using your real name and unique email address. Certificates will be sent via email within 30 days of the webinar date. If you have questions or need assistance, please contact smallsystems@syr.edu. Now for a little bit about us. The Environmental Finance Center Network provides training and technical assistance to small water and wastewater systems in all U.S. states and territories through our Building Technical, Managerial, and Finance Capacity programs. If your community or utility needs assistance with drinking water or wastewater system management, please feel free to contact us through our request form, which I will be sharing shortly in the chat. One of the many ways EFCN can support your community or utility is through our free funding application support. Struggling with an infrastructure funding application, falling short on project funding, not sure where to start? EFCN is here to help. Use the link in the chat to submit a request and receive tailored support based on your project's needs. And on that note, we can get started. I would like to turn it over to Jess Eckerlin, also from the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center, so she can introduce our presenters for today.
Great. Thanks so much, Zoe. We have three fantastic speakers lined up today. Kicking us off will be Dallas Shattuck. She's a senior program manager for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's WIFIA program, where she focuses on program processes, policy, and stakeholder engagement. Previously, Dallas spent over 4 years working on the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund team at US EPA. Dallas has an MA in Environmental Resource Policy from the George Washington University and a BS degree in Chemistry and Criminal Justice from St. Francis University. Following Dallas, we have Allison Souter. She's a financial analyst with the US EPA Clean Water State Revolving Fund, where she leads outreach efforts to broaden the understanding and application of CWSRF funds. Allison has been with the EPA for 10 years and holds a master's in public management from the Johns Hopkins University and a BA in international studies and economics from American University. Prior to joining the EPA, she served as an agriculture volunteer in Peace Corps in Senegal. And finally, we have John Tall. He's a physical scientist with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Drinking Water State Revolving Fund program, where he co-leads the the Drinking Water Infrastructure Needs Survey and Assessment Initiative, DWINSA. He has been with the EPA for over 5 years and holds a degree in Civil and Environmental Engineering from the University of Alabama. All right, Dallas, we are ready for you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to turn my camera off just while I present because I always end up having some sort of technical issue. So thank you for the intro. Again, my name is Dallas Shattuck, Senior Program Manager at EPA's WIFIA program, and I'm going to kick things off by talking about the WIFIA program. Okay, so the WIFIA program is essentially a government bank at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And our goal is to fund drinking water, wastewater, stormwater projects to public and private entities, and provide them a flexible supplemental source of funding. We provide long loan terms, flexible loan agreements, and when paired with the SRF programs, which you're going to hear more about later, bonds, cash, or other state or federal funding sources, we're able to accelerate projects that are going to have environmental and public health and economic benefits for communities, save money for the communities, and move these projects forward quicker. So on this slide, I just have a quick overview, some high-level data points on our portfolio. So the WIFIA program closed its first loan in 2018, and since then we have closed 149 loans, totaling $23 billion in WIFIA financing that will support around $50 billion in water infrastructure projects across the country. We're estimating that those projects will create around 167,000 jobs, will save communities almost $8 billion over the life of their loans, and they are benefiting 67 million people across the country. So this slide has some high-level things to know about the program if you aren't familiar with the WIFIA program. So by law, the majority of WIFIA borrowers have a minimum project size of $20 million. And for those projects, we can fund up to 49% of your project costs. So if you have a $20 million project, we can give you a loan for, I think it's like 9.8. Or if you have a $100 million project, we could give you a loan for up to $49 million. And then the rest would come from co-funding sources. So typically we see the SRF, they're one of our most common co-funding sources, bonds, cash, depending on what state you're in. We've seen Bureau of Reclamation grants, we've seen ARPA, we've seen congressionally directed spending grants, other state, local sources of funding. If you are a small entity, which for us, you can see on the slide, is defined as 25,000 or less people, again, you're a small community, and that means your minimum project size drops from $20 million down to $5 million. And for small communities, we can fund up to a maximum of 80% of your project. So if you have a $5 million project, we could give you a loan for up to $4 million, and then that last million would again come from co-funding sources. The one thing that I like to note, because I get asked this a lot, we do not really have restrictions on what the co-funding sources can be. The only thing to note is that by law, no more than 80% of the money in the project can be federal. So let's say if you have a $100 million project, $80 million of that can be federal. So if WIFIA is 49 million of that, you can have 31 million more federal dollars before you hit that 80% cap. So, Bureau of Reclamation, USDA, ARPA, which we still see congressionally directed spending, those are federal. The cool thing about the SRF dollars is that some are federal, some are not. And so that also makes them a very flexible co-funding partner, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, because we can use some of their dollars and them not be counting towards the federal cap. Other things to know, so we have loan terms of up to 35 years after substantial completion of the project. So again, the clock does not start when you sign the loan or during construction. It starts after construction completion. And so for a lot of our folks, they're looking at 40 years, 41, 42 years from the time they sign the loan, assuming they haven't started construction yet, until the time all of their repayments are due. So things are spread out for them over a very long term. Folks have the option to defer repayments. So you can defer all repayments up to 5 years after completion of the project. At the 5-year mark, you do have to start making at least interest-only payments, but based on how much flexibility you want and your financials, our underwriting team can can give you some more flexibility and do period of interest only payments. And then you can ramp up principal payments later on. And so you'll see an example of this later, but we see folks do this to, do more moderate, slower rate increases if they're finishing paying off like a bond or an SRF loan, just kind of spreading things out over the longer term. If they're experiencing, pretty rapid population growth, that way the costs are being spread amongst their future users and the burden is not all on their current population. We see a variety of reasons, but those are some of the flexibilities you can see in the loan structure. Interest rate, it's interesting. It's determined on the day of loan closing. So the morning of loan closing, the underwriter will go look at the Treasury rate. We use the state and local government series table. I haven't looked today, but I believe yesterday it was like 4.8% is what we were looking at if somebody closed a loan yesterday. And so rates are a little higher than they were in the earlier years of the program. And so one of the things that I'm always emphasizing to folks is what we call our interest rate reset. And that it gives folks who've closed their loan the option to one-time reset their interest rate if rates drop. So as long as you haven't dispersed any of the funding and you're not more than halfway done with construction, you can request that reset. So let's say rates dropped to 4%, you closed yesterday at 4.8%, we could reset it to that 4%, and that's what it would be locked in at over the next several decades. I'm going to talk a little bit more about eligibility on the next slide, but the last thing to know, and this will be similar for the SRF programs, is that as a federal program, there are federal requirements that apply. So NEPA environmental review, Davis-Bacon wage requirements, and the domestic preference requirements would apply to WIFIA funding. So for eligibility, I like to talk about who is eligible. So it's really a wide range of public and private entities. So we can fund local governments, tribal governments, county governments. We can fund state authorities. We can fund SRF programs, so they can supplement their funds and provide more loans to more people. Corporations, trusts. We can do P3 projects. Really a wide range of entities in terms of who can receive WIFIA funding. And in terms of what we can fund, it's really, again, wide range of water infrastructure related projects: drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, water reuse, non-point source, source water protection. All of those types of activities that you would see under the SRF can also be funded under WIFIA. And commonly folks are coming to us, to address regulatory compliance, either current or future compliance, water quality issues, water quantity issues, and just modernizing infrastructure that was built in the 1960s and 70s and it needs to be upgraded. And so those are all things that we can do. And then for the last bullet, what I like to emphasize is that we can fund more than just construction, because I know some other programs are different. But for WIFIA, it's pretty much most of the things you can think of related to the project. So planning, design, project management costs, land acquisition, some of the financing related costs, like to get a credit rating letter and things like that. Those types of project costs can be included in the loan and are eligible for reimbursement. Okay. I'm not going to go over this entire slide, but I just like to make sure folks see it and that you know that there's a link at the bottom. So when you get the slides, it can take you to our full website. So we have a variety of benefits and flexibilities that we think can address some of the common challenges borrowers are facing, the ones that we're hearing about when we're meeting with communities. For example, borrowers ultimately want to minimize impacts on the ratepayers. So we can help with that by sculpting the repayment schedule. You can wrap us around other debt. Again, and I have an example of this later and kind of what that looks like. So you can defer repayments, make lower payments early on while you do more moderate rate increases. And again, you could finish paying off a bond, SRF loan, and then focus on the WIFIA repayment. And then I talked about this on the last slide, but we have that interest rate reset option. So if the rates drop after you close, If you meet those few conditions, you have the ability to come in and lock in a lower interest rate over the life of the remaining decades. So we're also seeing a lot of folks coming to us with just these really big, complex, we call them once in a generation projects. So the ability to lock in funding early, know you have that financial commitment up front can be really beneficial for planning. Again, sculpted repayment can be helpful with this, spreading it out over a longer period of time, especially for a lot of our borrowers who are experiencing rapid population growth. And then we also have something we call a master agreement, which is a contract between you and an EPA. It sets up legal and financial terms in which you can borrow, you can close multiple loans over time. I think it's usually a 5-year window as projects or phases of like a really big project are ready to be financed. And so a lot of times we have folks say, I have a 10-year CIP. I would like $200 million in WIFIA financing, but the projects aren't great to bundle together because they're just spread out over so many years. So we can bundle them in smaller groups, set aside the 200 million, and then you can close your first loan for like 75 million, and then your next loan for 75 million, and then the last loan for 50 million. But up front that you are going to have that 200 million set aside as your projects are ready to move forward. So that can give folks some more certainty in their planning. And so one of the other things we see often is that folks want to keep their projects moving even while they're, submitting applications for or waiting to hear back about grant funding. And so folks can still take advantage of that option throughout the project, even after you close the loan. And so you have, the ability, again, you can secure other funding after the loan has closed. The WIFIA loans are disbursements, so they're same as the SRF. So we don't write you a check on the day you close the loan. We give you an up to loan amount. So let's say up to $100 million. And then you do the work, incur the costs, submit the invoices to us, and then we review them and disperse that funding to you within 15 days. So you're only drawing funds as you need them, and you're only accruing interest on the funds that you draw down, not on money that hasn't been drawn down yet. And the loans are also an up to amount. So let's say you have a loan for up to 100 million, but then you find out about a $10 million grant. That's not a problem. With us, you can just draw down $90 million. You don't owe that other $10 million because you never drew it down and you never accrued interest on it because it never was dispersed to you. And so that's something that some folks keep in their back pocket. We also have no penalty for prepayment if that's something that is of interest to folks. So again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I want you to just be able to see it. And then the link at the bottom takes you to our solutions webpage where all of these, I think there are a couple extras, are discussed in more detail. Okay, so the loan process. So we have what I call a 3-step process. First step is what we call project selection, and that is where you submit what we call a letter of interest. It's not a full application. It's no cost, no obligation. It tells us who you are, what project or projects you want to fund, and credit information, either a credit rating letter or a financial pro forma, like a spreadsheet, so we can do a credit analysis. And it looks out like usually 10 years is how far we're looking out for the LOI. And so those can be submitted at any time. You can start that process. We review those, assuming there are no eligibility concerns or credit concerns, and you're ready to move on a technical aspect of the project, we invite you to apply. From that point, it's kind of driven by your time frame. You have 1 year to submit an application from the time you're invited to apply. And so then you will work with my colleague, Amelia. She talks with folks, helps them through the application process, talks about requirements, explains in detail what we need for the application. She is the first person who will review your application materials when you submit them, and you'll work with her to get a complete application that's ready to be going to the underwriter. So it's ready to be underwritten. And then she will hand off that process. And so you would work with her to kind of figure out what you need for the application if you want to apply. Because again, some folks are submitting letter of interest with us. They're applying to the SRF. They're trying to get congressionally directed spending. There's other state programs. They're going for Bureau of Reclamation. And you're just trying to see what works out. And so that's totally fine. But assuming you want to move forward, you submit your application, you're in that project approval stage. Again, we're reviewing your application, making sure it's complete from like a technical and credit perspective. It goes to the transaction team, which on our end has an underwriter, a risk manager, environmental reviewer, an engineer, and one of our lawyers. And so we will work with your team and your consultants to underwrite the loan, do negotiations, find terms that work for you, that work for us, and get to loan closing. And then that's like a very exciting step, but then there's still like 30 years of work that has to happen after that. So that is project monitoring. And so you're going to build the project or, design the project. We can do planning and design only loans. So you're going to do the work, whatever's in the scope of the loan. You're going to have a portfolio manager who will be your point of contact after you close the loan. They will collect construction monitoring reports from you. I think there's like annual financial monitoring that they do. They will answer any questions you have. They will process your disbursements and get that back to you within 15 days. And then when you're at the point where you're ready to start repaying the loan, they will be the person to help you collect those repayments. And then again, just emphasizing 15-day turnaround on those disbursements. So I think we've dispersed in the WIFIA program around $12 billion since probably 2019, 2020, and all within 15 days. So we move quick to get you your money as fast as possible. And then on this slide, I just wanted to talk quickly about what for the WIFIA program readiness means. It looked like somebody had a question on this, and I just made this little graphic. So it was like perfect timing to fit this in. So from a technical perspective, what our folks are looking at is, does the documentation support the project that you want to develop or construct? And really what that means is, do you have an idea of what you want to do? If you know you need to replace your wastewater treatment plant, then you know what you need to do. Sometimes folks say, we need to address our water supply. We don't have enough water, but they don't know if they're going to drill or implement water reuse. And so maybe like we can fund the planning and design and the studies associated with that, but they don't sound ready from the technical perspective to move forward on the project because they're not sure what they need to do yet. They just know that there's some problem they need to address. Ready to proceed within 2 years typically. So either you're starting construction within 2 years, or if you're doing planning and design only, you've started that within 2 years. And then that you have, it doesn't have to be perfect, but that you have some realistic expectation of what the project costs are going to be. Because after you submit your application, once we start the underwriting process and we get to a certain point down the road, we can't increase your loan amount anymore because then we'll have to like redo all of the loan documents and things like that. And it's gone through our approval process. So having some sort of reasonable expectation of what the project cost is going to be is another sign of technical readiness. On the financial end, folks need to have already or be able to obtain a credit rating. So at the letter of interest phase, you don't need a credit rating letter, but by the time you submit an application, you do. So the law requires our borrowers to be investment grade rated, which is BBB- or higher. And so again, at letter of interest stage, you can submit a pro forma, like an Excel sheet, and we can go through that and do an evaluation of whether we think that you will be able to become investment grade rated later in the process. And but at some point you will need to get a credit rating letter if you do not have one. And you will need to know your security and lien position. So if you need to know, how are you going to repay the loan? Are you paying with your water revenue? Are you paying with general obligation debt, some sort of other tax, wastewater revenue? Those are all things that we need to know. And are you looking at a, for the most part, senior lien position? Sometimes folks will ask for a subordinate lien position. It's possible that takes a little bit more negotiation and due diligence, but those are the types of things that you should have ready or have some idea of what you're looking for when you come to the program, and we can help you walk through that. And then the last thing that my financial folks have pointed out is that folks need to have or be able to get the approval to issue debt from whatever your issuing body is legally. Okay, next slide. Okay. And so, like I mentioned before, the WIFIA program, we are a federal loan program. We say we're a government bank, and that means that we're open year round. We get money every year from Congress. It just goes into our bank and supplements the funding that we have available. But we are able to make loans on an ongoing basis and have folks come in whenever they're ready. And again, for most people, we can do up to 49% of your project costs. And then for communities, 25,000 or less, it's up to a maximum of 80%. And I believe I mentioned this, but just to, if you take anything away from this presentation, it is the top sentence. So letters of interest can be submitted at any time. We used to be in a competitive environment, but now it's non-competitive. And we found that having year-round access to the WIFIA program gets you quicker decisions from us. You can time it with other funding sources that you're looking at. And because it's not competitive, we can have conversations with you if we have a question about something you submitted. Or I will say one of the common things that I'm seeing now leading this process is that folks will tell me, we want to pay with our sewer revenue. And then they submit a credit rating letter, but it's not for the wastewater revenue. It's for general obligation debt or something that doesn't match how they want to repay the loan. And so then we have to have conversations about how we rectify that, because we have to be able to do a credit evaluation on how you actually want to repay the loan. And so being in this non-competitive environment, we can do that. You don't have to be worried like we have to submit everything perfectly. If it's missing one piece of information, it gets thrown out and we have to try again next year. Not the case. You will hear from me and we will get it figured out. So to start that process, you would submit the letter of interest on our secure SharePoint site. It's limited access, only people who request, so it's like either the community or their consultants would have access to the folder, and then our reviewers. And so you would ask us to set you up one of those secure folders, and you just email us at wifia@epa.gov, and we would get that set up for you. Okay, and I know there are a lot of folks on the call today, but just to reiterate, like I'm always doing presentations like this, but me and other folks on the WIFIA team are always happy to meet in a smaller setting or one-on-one if you are a community and you want to talk about your project, or you have questions we don't get to them today, or you don't want to ask them right now, we can talk about them. We also have, I'm sure, some consultants on the call, happy to chat with you also. We also are always happy to do like a WIFIA 101. We do it commonly for like consulting engineering firms who are doing their first WIFIA project or who haven't done a WIFIA project in a while. Always happy to do that. We also, if you look on our website, we have monthly office hours, and it is usually a quick 101 if folks need that, and then it's just a time for folks to ask questions. And so it's the second Wednesday of every month at 3 o'clock Eastern. And so I think it's next Wednesday is our February office hours. Okay, and that is enough for me. I will turn it over to Allison. I think you're next.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. So I'm Allison Souders. I work on the Clean Water State Revolving Fund team at EPA headquarters. So I'll kick off the SRF overview. So if you want to go to the first slide up here. So what are the state revolving funds, or the SRFs? So whereas Dallas's WIFIA program is basically an infrastructure bank with money coming from the feds, the SRFs are a state-federal partnership that provides funding and financing to eligible borrowers for a wide range of drinking water and water quality projects. The difference with WIFIA is that the SRF programs are managed by the states, and assistance is distributed directly from state agencies. So often like the DEQ or DNR within your state is where the drinking water and clean water state revolving funds will be housed. And the procedures and funding of eligible projects for each of those state revolving funds vary according to the priorities of each state. Next slide. So how do the SRF work? The 51 CWSRF and 51 DWSRF programs operate like banks. Each year, Congress appropriates funding to EPA that is then awarded as capitalization grants or seed money to each state and Puerto Rico's program. For most capitalization grants, states provide a 20% match at that level, and those assets are then used to make low interest loans and other types of assistance to borrowers for eligible water quality and drinking water projects. Funds are then repaid to the SRFs and recycled to fund other water quality and public health projects at the state level, continuing the revolving cycle. Some states raise additional project funding by leveraging their program through selling bonds, and the assets of the states of the program provide security repayment for the bonds, but that's not every state. So the next slide is just kind of the flow of funds here. Again, each program is receiving capitalization grants from the EPA, which are in turn used to make those loans that are revolving there on the right-hand side. Under the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, the programs have the option to keep a portion of that seed money or capitalization grant as set-asides to fund DWSRF and related programs like capacity development, source water protection, and provide non-infrastructure support to communities. And like I mentioned, these funds can also be leveraged with other public and private financing sources. The next slide, Dallas talked about some of the benefits of WIFIA, and many of those are also exist within the SRF program. The SRFs are versatile and reliable sources of funding. Interest is typically charged at half the market rate for the state revolving funds, saving communities hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars over the life of loans. I believe that I'll get to it in a few slides here. I think the interest rate was like 1.4% compared to 4% market rate. For the SRFs, extended loan terms up to 30 years or more are available, helping to spread the repayment over time. And a big benefit is that repayments do not begin until 12 months after construction or 18 months for drinking water SRF. There is no minimum or maximum project dollar size with the SRFs. It really ranges from a few $1,000s to over $1 billion, I believe. And funding can be paired with other sources. Like Dallas mentioned, WIFIA can put in 49%, so oftentimes the SRF will come in with the other 51%, or other sources of funding will be combined into an overall funding packages for these projects. So the next slide is just a quick overview of what a typical application process might look like. But like I mentioned, each state has their own application and application cycles. So even timing might differ state to state. So you would want to check each state's SRF website and what is called their intended use plan for more detailed information on their application process and their funding timelines. It's also important to note that states rank projects, and that ranking process and their priorities will vary state by state too. So it's useful to check the state's intended use plan. I can put a link to the state programs in the chat. This link has links to all of the state programs. So the next slide is just an overview of the funding, the numbers for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program. Since 1998, the CWSRFs have provided over $194 billion in total for over 53,000 projects, including $12.8 billion provided in fiscal year 25 from a federal allotment of $3.3 billion. And like I mentioned earlier, the national average interest rate for 25 was 1.7 compared to about 4% prevailing market rate based on GEO bonds. So the next slide is a quick overview of who's eligible to borrow from the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. Federally, we have a pretty broad list of who is eligible to use the SRF, including municipalities, nonprofits, private entities, watershed groups, homeowners associations, even individuals. But although this, again, varies state by state, some states may not fund private systems or private entities, but you would want to check with the SRF in your state. On the next slide, just what type of projects are eligible for Clean Water SRF. There are 12 statutory project eligibilities for the Clean Water SRF that come from the Clean Water Act. These include the construction of publicly owned treatment works, the implementation of a state non-point source management plan and the activities on those, decentralized wastewater treatment systems like septic tanks or individual household systems, stormwater management, water and energy efficiency projects, and more. It is important to note that the SRF can fund capital projects as well as planning and design, but it cannot fund operations and maintenance activities. So the next slide is just continuing some of the projects that are eligible. But like, again, I mentioned project and borrower eligibility varies by state and project type. So to confirm eligibility of the project that you're looking for, you would check with your state's intended use plan on their website. Each state program develops those IUPs annually, and those spell out the program goals and operations for that state. And I believe now John will take over with an overview of the Drinking Water SRF.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm John Tao with the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund at EPA. Before we dive into the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, I wanted to highlight some of our achievements to date. So in 2025, the DWSRF signed 2,022 assistance agreements. We provided $8.28 billion in assistance. Our loan sizes range from $8,335 to $146 million. The average loan interest rate was 1.54%. And since 1997, when the DWSRF began providing assistance to public water systems, the DWSRF has provided $71.4 billion in assistance, and we've signed 23,135 assistance agreements in our almost 30 years. Next slide, please. All right, so who is eligible to use the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund? So public or private community water systems and non-profit non-community water systems. For public or private community water systems, these are systems serving at least 15 service connections used by year-round residents or regularly serves at least 25 year-round residents. For the non-profit non-community water systems, these systems do not serve the same group of people year-round, but are still subject to regulatory requirements to ensure the safety and quality of the water. So examples of some nonprofit non-community water systems is going to be your schools, your publicly owned campgrounds, parks, and churches. One thing I do want to note with the asterisk for private is some states do not fund private systems or private entities. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about what types of projects are eligible for DWSRF funding. So treatment projects, so these are going to be projects to install or upgrade facilities to improve drinking water quality to comply with drinking water regulations. So some examples of that would be installing or upgrading filtration systems, disinfection systems, and chemical feed systems. Transmission and distribution projects. So this will be your rehabilitation, replacement, or installation of pipes to improve water pressure to safe levels or to prevent contamination caused by leaky or broken pipes. This also includes your lead service line replacement. Source type projects, this is going to be your rehabilitation of wells or development of eligible sources to replace contaminated sources. Storage projects, installation or upgrade of finished water storage tanks to prevent microbiological contamination from entering the distribution system. Consolidation projects, this will be for interconnecting 2 or more water systems. We also fund creation of new water systems, so constructing a new water system to serve homes with a contaminated individual well, or consolidate existing systems into a new regional water system. Planning and design, we help with that for all the project types listed above, and we also help with some technical assistance. Next slide, please. So how can you apply for SRF funding? Develop your plans and identify your needs. So develop a capital improvement plan. Your state SRF program can provide planning and development assistance. It's very important to engage with your state SRF program. Each state has a process and timeline for applications, and you'll want to discuss funding options with your state to build a plan for your community. Another important note is to work early with your state to get projects on the intended use plan. I think Allison mentioned this earlier. If you're familiar with an IUP, it's a document that outlines how states intend to spend funds provided by the DWSRF for a given fiscal year. So the IUP is a critical component of the DWSRF program. For example, states list their funding priorities and compile a list of projects. And build an ongoing relationship with your state SRF program. So just FYI, IIJA funds cover the fiscal years from 2022 to 2026. So we're nearing the end of that, but the base SRF programs are ongoing and will continue. So next slide, please. I think I'm turning it back over to you, Dallas.
Okay, and then I am going to talk about, we're almost done, and then we'll have time for Q&A, but I'm going to talk for a little bit about what it might look like for co-funding and coordination, and talk specifically about, once I can get my, a resource that we worked on. So in late 2024, the WIFIA program and the SRFs, we co-authored and published, and there's a link at the bottom under the picture, a fact sheet that talks about co-funding between WIFIA and the SRF programs, what the process kind of looks like, and how you can utilize both programs to finance water infrastructure. And again, the link is below. I'm assuming might be shared with the resources later. You're always welcome to send me an email if you can't find it online. But it's a great resource, and I would say, at least when I'm meeting with folks and talking to them or presenting, I am usually always asked about co-funding with the SRF program. And so we figured it was something that a lot of folks were interested in. And so the fact sheet kind of walks through some different categories or benefits of WIFIA and SRF co-funding. And so one of those that it talks about is maximizing funding. So again, for the WIFIA program, for most people, we can fund up to 49% of your project or up to 80% if you're a small community. So using us for that first chunk, and then below market interest rate SRF loan, with the rate, I think for last year they said was 1.5%, to finance the remaining costs can lead to substantial savings compared to if you were to fund the whole project with municipal bonds. If you're comparing the no cost flexibilities of the WIFIA program, and depending on your credit rating, some interest rate savings and some interest savings by how you structure your disbursements, plus the lower interest rate of the SRF loan, folks can save quite a bit of money compared to traditional bonds. And the WIFIA program, I didn't really talk about this, but we Our loans have historically ranged from 10 million to 726 million, and we are currently working on a few that are less than 10 million and some that are over $1 billion in financing. And so we have not heard a number that is too big for us. And as long as eligibility and the credit checks out, and that makes sense for you from a financial perspective, we can offer folks an unlimited amount of funding. You can sculpt, backload it around other types of debt, and then you compare it with what you get from your SRF program at the lower interest rate, or if you're able to get some of those grant-like dollars, again, you can save significant amounts of money. And then as an example, I talked about at the bottom, the city of Sandy in Oregon. So this was one of the projects that got a WIFIA loan. I believe it was in late 2024. And so we gave them a loan. I believe it was like $13 million for their Clean Waters program. And so this is a small community because they are 25,000 or less people, which is the WIFIA statutory requirement. And so they were able to get a loan for up to 80% of project costs. And I think the final ratio ended up around 75% WIFIA. And then they were able to pair it with an Oregon SRF loan because they were using non-federal dollars. And so they were able to save money and fully fund the project between WIFIA and the Oregon SRF program. So one of the other things that we talk about in the fact sheet is accelerating project implementation. And so one of the things that we do for the WIFIA program is we can fund really big projects. We can also bundle a bunch of projects together and fund them under a single loan, which helps communities be able to do things quicker than if you were funding each individual project at once. And there are also, a lot of SRFs that have a lot of demand. They're very oversubscribed. And so they don't have capacity to fund everyone who asks and to give them the full amount that they are asking for. And so pairing what they're able to provide with WIFIA and bundling those together can help some of these bigger projects that would normally need to be done over many, many years or in many different phases can kind of accelerate those timelines. Again, versus piecing together several small loans year after year after year to complete a project. And so plenty of examples of this, but the ones that we picked for this, so Pflugerville, Texas, they are a frequent WIFIA borrower. In late 2024, we gave them a master agreement, which again is an upfront contract that says we will give you X millions of dollars over time as your projects are ready. And so they are coming in for bundles of projects under their 10-year CIP. And so we are, for WIFIA, giving them pretty large chunks of money for each bundle of projects. And then some of those projects within the CIP are also receiving money from the Texas State Revolving Fund. So we're able to help them move their 10-year CIP projects along at a quick pace. And similarly, we have in Massachusetts, the Springfield Water and Sewer Commission. This is one of our earlier projects. So they have a $250 million WIFIA loan in which they bundled 30 projects together. And then some of those individual projects within the WIFIA bundle were also receiving SRF dollars. And according to the commission, who's been a great partner in all of this, they estimate that being able to pair that funding together and do all of those projects in a single loan will accelerate their water infrastructure investments by 15 years. Okay. Utilizing flexibilities. And so this is the example I alluded to earlier when we talk about like flexible repayments. So SRFs and WIFIA all have different repayment deferral options. So it's 12 months after project completion for the Clean Water SRF, 18 months for the Drinking Water SRF, and then 5 years for the WIFIA program. And like I mentioned, for the WIFIA program, After that 5-year period, you do have to start making payments, but it can be interest-only payments, and then you can do several years of interest-only payments, finish paying off a bond, or you can wrap us around a 20-year SRF loan if you're co-funding the project with the SRF, and then do the principal payments after you finish paying off the SRF loan. So there are a lot of different options for how we structure this. And so I like this example. It's a little bit of an extreme example of sculpting and flexible repayment, but City of Sunnyvale, California has a $220 million WIFIA loan. They wanted that customized, and so they wrapped it around an SRF loan that was $168 million. And so they are, again, this is a more extreme example of customization, but it is something that we can do depending on what works for you. But they deferred for 5 years, and then they made interest-only payments they will make them for several decades. And then starting on year 30, after they've paid off their SRF loan that is also paying for this project, then they will pay off the principal and the remaining interest over the last 5 years of the loan term. So again, a more extreme example, but that is an example of the type of thing that we are able to do to move projects forward. And then the last one is streamline compliance. I think this is one of the most important because a lot of the projects, I mean, all of the WIFIA projects have co-funding sources because we cannot fully fund a project. But working in the Drinking Water SRF, I know that a lot of those projects are also co-funded with U.S. Department of Agriculture or FEMA or WIFIA or community grants or ARPA dollars or other state programs. And so it's more common that projects are funded with multiple sources than being fully funded by a single source. And so one of the things we are always asked about is how do you streamline the process, or how do you make it as efficient as possible, especially for small communities who don't have as many staff and they can't be doing paperwork for the WIFIA program and then go and do the same paperwork for the SRF program 6 months later. And so we totally get that. And so for the WIFIA and SRF programs, we work together and with other federal programs to try and streamline and eliminate the duplication of effort in the paperwork and the federal requirements. So we coordinate on the American Iron and Steel, Build America, Buy America. Environmental reviews is a big one for us, and that's the example below. The WIFIA team, we have an environmental review staff. And so once you submit an application, they will do the environmental review for you, and they will do any consultations needed. They will coordinate with your co-funding partners to determine who is the lead agency, share documentation, because each program will have to do its own environmental determination. But if they can share documentation, then they can use the same documents to do the evaluations and keep communities from having to do the same paperwork 3 times. Which is a win for everybody. So as an example, Morro Bay, California, which is a small borrower in California, I think they have a population of around 10,000 people. They did a water reuse project, and that's co-funded with WIFIA, California SRF, and I believe they also are in the process of getting Bureau of Reclamation funding since it's a water reuse project. But so the WIFIA program led the environmental consultations as part of this loan, and then we shared all of that documentation, the reports, consultation results. We gave that to the California SRF program, and they can use that to do their state level environmental review. And so the borrower is not doing something multiple times. And then same with Bureau of Reclamation. That documentation has been or will be shared with them when they need it to do their environmental review. So again, saving time and being as efficient as possible for communities and their consultants. Okay, so wrapping up here, because I'm sure there are a lot of questions, at least I hope. I can't see the questions, but I'm assuming that there are some. Communities can use WIFIA and the SRF programs together to co-fund up to 100% of an eligible project. And we've talked about this, but co-funding between these programs has funding efficiencies, there are cost savings and other advantages for communities who are able to bundle these types of financing together. And so this is the last slide. I'm going to stop sharing my screen in a minute so I can see everybody, but you will get a copy of the slides. Our contact information is here. There is, for the WIFIA section, again, wifia@epa.gov. Also, if you ever have questions, we have a newsletter that you can sign up for. And then I think Allison put it in the chat also, but there's the clean water and drinking water state level contacts, because if you have specific questions, you're probably going to want to reach out to your state SRF folks, and then just some website resources for all three programs. And with that, I will turn it back to Jess. Am I turning it back to you?
Yes, great. Thank you so much. That was really informative. We do have a lot of questions, which is great.
Good.
We anticipated that. So I am just gonna go right through the list. And the three of you can jump in as needed. So Dave said, you may plan to cover this later on in the presentation, but I'm curious, how are projects scored to determine which projects will be funded or not? Are there certain categories that are scored? Is there a percentage assigned to each category? And is there a certain total score that usually gets funded? So looking for the rubric there.
I can talk about WIFIA, and then Allison and John, you can talk about how it works for us, because it's different. So for the WIFIA program, again, and I don't remember when this question was asked, it might have been before I said this, so I apologize if it's redundant. Non-competitive environment, and in that letter of interest, we're going to ask you about you as an entity, the projects that you want funded, make sure you can pay back a loan, and then there are some questions at the end that are really just getting at what are the environmental, economic, and public health benefits of the project. And so we do that evaluation, and assuming all of those things check out, we invite you to apply. You're not being scored against another community. There's not a list that's created. It's really just, are you passing this base level threshold? Is this project going to benefit the environment? And is it a credit worthy loan? And then we would invite you to apply. But it's a little bit different for the SRF. So I will let Allison and John talk about what that looks like.
Yeah, so the SRFs have something called project priority lists that each state's develop, and those will be based on state water quality priorities. And so for projects to receive financing from either the CWSRF, they need to be on the state's project priority list. And to see like the ranking criteria, you would go to the state's website and check their files there. They will have their project priority list. It might be part of their IUP. And then you can also look back and see like which projects have been funded and that were on the priority list to get an idea of like how yours would maybe score with that. But also it's good just to contact your SRF right away as soon as you're thinking of coming to them. So you can talk through that with people out there.
Great.
Yep, this is the same for drinking water also.
Oh, thanks, John. Our next question is from Sandy, who is curious what gap funding you would suggest for disadvantaged communities in states that do not offer grant funding opportunities.
That's a good question. I am the funding programs that I know the best are the two that are discussed on this call. And so a lot of times I'm sending people who I meet with who might not be the right fit for the WIFIA program, or who might not have a big enough project. I will send them to the SRF program or USDA Rural Development to take a look. Those are the ones I'm most familiar with. If you're having trouble finding funding sources, some things that I also recommend to folks, and Allison, chime in if I'm missing anything, is EPA has what we call a water finance clearinghouse, which are water finance center hosts, and it has thousands of resources and webinars and funding options at like the national, state, regional, and local levels. And so always recommend folks check out the Water Finance Clearinghouse. If you are having trouble finding funding, or, oh, thank you, Allison, for putting in the chat, or for finding, maybe you have an SRF loan, but you can't fully fund the project and you need that gap funding. You could also, I don't know if you have this link, Allison, contact our water TA programs, so our water technical assistance programs, like the Syracuse EFC does some of this work, and they are experts in all things water, and they are probably the best suited to know about all of the different funding options that are available. So you can always fill out that form and get connected with a environmental finance center or another technical assistance provider to walk you through those options or whatever challenges you're facing. I don't know if you have anything else, Allison or John, that I missed.
I can add on quickly. I don't think we really got into what we call additional subsidization, but SRF statutes and recent appropriations have required that each SRF program puts out a certain percentage of their funds as additional subsidization, which is basically principal forgiveness, so an amount of the loan that doesn't need to be repaid back. We call it basically grant equivalence, which it really helps out communities. It can be up to 100% of the loan amount, pretty much getting rid of the repayment burden for communities, but this is usually based on affordability criteria that each state sets. So again, you would want to look at the IEP or contact your state to see if your community or project would be eligible for principal forgiveness or the grant-like funds that are available actually from the SRF.
That's great. Thanks, Allison. And thank you, Dallas, for the shout out for SUEFC. I dropped the link to our technical assistance help request form into the participant chat, so you can submit your request there and one of us will get back to you. All right, moving on. Next question from Karen. Please confirm that DWSRF can fund a nonprofit transient non-community public water system.
Yes, nonprofit, non-community, yes.
Okay, great. What is the maximum DWSRF loan amount available per project?
I don't think we have a maximum amount, actually.
Wow.
It would depend on the state. Sorry, I know I'm here for WIFIA, but sometimes it's hard to get out of SRF mode. Some states don't have a maximum, but there are a lot of states who implement them just because they have so much demand that they might have to put like a $12 million cap or 20, depending on how much money they receive. So it really does go state by state and program by program. It might be different on the drinking water side versus the clean water side in the same state. Okay, I'm done talking about SRF now.
Like, I think the biggest one that I said for last year for clean water was 640 million for one loan. What was yours, John?
I want to say it was 180 million.
Yeah, they get really big. And then the smallest on the flip side was only $9,000 for us. So agricultural BMPs on a farm are eligible. So some states will fund that, and that's a lot smaller increments.
All right, great. Our next question is from Darren. Can we safely assume that if we work with WIFIA and SRF, that the funding stack can be arranged to make sure the 80% max federal funding is not exceeded? For example, if we pursue 49% WIFIA and 51% SRF.
That's a good question. From the WIFIA perspective, that isn't an issue for us. I will say we have we've funded around 150 projects, and I think at least half of them have some sort of SRF funding, whether it's full SRF or a portion of that match is SRF. And it has never been an issue, the 80% cap, and working with the SRF to kind of figure out if it's federal dollars or non-federal dollars. But I will say that decision is ultimately up to the SRF. So the WIFIA program can't tell the SRF to make it non-federal dollars. That's a choice that they have the authority to make. But in working with them, a lot of times, you know, we all want to see the projects move forward and do it as efficiently as possible and not have the community have to go find another source of funding or use cash or go get a bond for the remainder of the gap. And so we work really well together to make sure that we're not going over that 80% threshold. And worst case scenario is if the SRF said that they had to use federal dollars, then we would lower the WIFIA loan amount. So we weren't going over the 80%. And so they would have to find that remaining 20%, but we would adjust on our end based on the decision that the SRF is making.
Great. Answer that one. Any thoughts on communities in managing individual residential customer delinquency rates, gap funding for residents to cover their utility bill?
I mean, that's a very important topic, and it's a big need. As far as I know, it's not something that the WIFIA program can fund. I don't think it's something the SRF programs can fund either. I'm trying to think if there's a program that does allow for that. Go ahead, Alice, you're unmuted.
I was going to say, I'm not sure. I think that would be a good question for an EFC that has worked more like broadly, because we're really like water quality improvement is what needs to come out of a project for the SRFs. Whereas I think a lot of the EFCs have worked on like helping communities with rate increases and avoiding those. So.
Yes, and by EFC, Allison, you mean Environmental Facilities Corporation, right?
Or, well, environmental finance centers around the country.
Yeah, we have done some rates work too. A different EFC though than my home office. But yeah, there is some information on our website for that. Dallas, I think you covered this a little bit in the beginning, but Sally says, I've seen some articles wondering why WIFIA isn't more widely used. From my perspective as a consultant, SRF is a much better deal. No fee, full financing if state has sufficient money. Is there some other benefit to WIFIA other than perhaps a higher level of financing?
That's a good and fair question. I think, yes. So a lot of times, again, we can fund really big projects or provide funding for a really big bundle of projects. Again, we don't really have a minimum, maximum, are working on some over $1 billion. But I think some other benefits, you know, a lot of folks are coming to us because the SRFs are sending them to us because the SRFs just have so much demand. They can't fund all of the projects that are coming to them, and they definitely can't fully fund all of the projects that are coming to them. And so the rest of the money has to come from somewhere. And so we're getting that from there. We also, you know, our repayment term is a little bit longer than the SRF. I know on the drinking water side, some communities can go up to 40 years, but not many states actually implement the full 40 years because the goal is to get the money back as quick as possible and then loan it out again. And typically our repayment is much more flexible. I can't speak for all of the SRFs, but what you typically see is more mortgage style, more level payments. And we do deferred, wrap around. You can do interest only for 30 years, like I showed you in that example. And so if that's something that folks are looking for, that's something that they come to us for.
All right, great. This one is from Mark. This may be too far into the weeds for this webinar, but how is EPA WIFIA approaching DBE, currently given the president executive orders last year?
Oh, that's a good question. I actually can answer that if I pull this up. We actually address it on our website. So I don't know if I can put the link. I can put the link in the chat.
Great, I can transfer it over.
Okay, perfect. So I'm looking for the link. So we have on our website, oh, thank you, Allison. I always forget not to use acronyms. So it does not apply, DBE does not apply to the WIFIA program. And I was just, yeah. And I have the link here. So it takes you right to the blurb that we have on the disadvantaged business enterprise. And so you can take a look at that, and it just talks about, it's very short. It doesn't apply, but we get asked about some of these a lot. And so we have them on the website to clarify.
All right, great. So folks should head over to the website for that clarification. Perfect. Yep. All right, from Daryl, we are a small community. If we pursue a WIFIA loan, can we group multiple projects to reach the $5 million minimum project size?
Sure can.
Great. For the smaller 20% match amount required, is it the service area that determines the population, or is it the census area?
I'm assuming this is for WIFIA, service area. So the area that is going to be served by the project.
Great. Okay, just give me, these are coming in pretty fast. Can projects be broken up by so from Jamie, for the WIFIA and SRF programs, can projects be broken up by co-funding source in order to avoid federal requirements, AIS and BABA?
Mm-hmm.
Can they be broken
I don't
up?
think so. Most of the requirements are the same across programs. The SRFs have like a state level environmental review. It's like a NEPA-like review, and whereas our program has an actual NEPA review, but the other requirements that you're talking about, like Davis-Bacon, American Iron and Steel, those apply to all WIFIA and SRF projects. The area where we could consider is Build America, Buy America, because that does apply. It's a little complicated. And so we would have to talk offline if there's a specific project and how we structure it. But the Build America, Buy America requirements apply to all WIFIA projects, but they only apply to certain SRF projects, ones that are federal or using federal dollars. So that's a consideration. But the WIFIA program also has a design planning waiver for the Build America, Buy America requirements. And so if you can demonstrate that you've started design planning of the project prior to the day, I think it's like May 14th of 2020. I don't know. Time has been a blur.
2022, I think.
Thank you. May 14th or 15th of 2022. Then that would waive the BABA requirements for that loan and the project or the projects under that WIFIA loan. And the way that we have been implementing it is that if it is also receiving SRF funding, because the SRF is essentially another EPA program, the SRF may choose to use the EPA WIFIA BABA design planning waiver for those projects. And so there could be a little bit of coordination there to waive the BABA requirements, but I think in general the same requirements apply to both programs. That was a long answer, but there's some context I wanted to provide.
Great, thank you. I think you guys covered this, but just one more time. What are the total funding amounts for all of the programs this year?
Total funding amounts. I'm guessing that's asking about funding available. So for the WIFIA program, we announced it was around Thanksgiving time, another $7 billion going to the bank to add to the money that's already there. Most of that is for like individual projects that come in, but some of that money we have to set aside specifically for SRF programs if they want to come in and leverage, so then they can make more loans. To make more loans to more communities. Sorry, a question came in that I can't talk and read at the same time. But for WIFIA, at least $7 billion for this year. And I'll let John and Allison talk SRF.
Yeah, for drinking water, this is FY26. It's 892 million, but after earmarks, it is 410 million.
That's your allotments, John?
Yeah, that's our allotments.
Okay, yeah. Our federal allotment, so the CAP grants that went through the states was 3.3 billion for 25. And then that was loaned out to 12.8 billion in assistance agreements, but that's for the whole country. So you could look at the allotment tables for states on our EPA website. I'll put the link in the chat for clean water.
All right, great. Next from Vina, can WIFIA share its credit review process with SRFs?
Is this, yeah. Hi, Vina. I know Vina. Yeah.
Yeah.
We can, if you want to have a conversation offline, I'm sure we can talk about how you all do it, how we do it, how we can like work together, best practices for both. We've been talking to some other states and trying to start that, like California specifically, because we co-fund so much. So yeah, if you want to chat about that, happy to talk further about that.
I just had one.
While you're looking,
Yeah.
do you want me to answer the question about lien position?
Yes, thank you, Dallas. Yep,
that'd be great. Okay, while you're looking for one. So does the SRF loan get parity for lien position with WIFIA? I can answer that. So for the WIFIA program, the law says that we have to be parity or senior to any of the other project debt. So if you are funding a project with WIFIA and SRF, we either have to be on the same debt level or we have to be above the SRF. So I mean, a lot of times we're going to be on the same level. We cannot be subordinate or below the SRF for the project. But some people do like to take advantage of the fact that the WIFIA loan can be subordinate to other program debt you have. So if you have like another SRF loan, old like bonds that aren't related to the project, we can be subordinate to those. And so from that's from the WIFIA perspective. I can't speak to how each SRF does it. I don't know if they all allow senior and subordinate and how they're structured, but for WIFIA, we're probably on parity if we're co-funding with SRF.
I think we might be down to our last question, which I think is something that you covered, but Paul asks, can you elaborate on the use of SRF loans and WIFIA loans? If the SRF loan is 20 years, does the WIFIA loan kick in after the SRF is completed?
Oh, that's a good question. So no, if you're talking about loan term. So for the WIFIA, it is 35 years after substantial completion of the project. And I think it's the same for the SRF. And then, so from that date and time, For WIFIA, you're going out 35 years, and then you're going out 20 years maybe for the SRF. And so the time period starts around the same time, but what a lot of folks will do is they'll defer WIFIA for 5 years, so they're not making payments on WIFIA, but they'll have to start paying back on their SRF loan. And then they'll do interest only WIFIA payments for like the next 15 years while they continue and finish paying off their SRF debt. And then once they pay off the SRF loan over those 20 years, as an example, because 20 years is a common loan term, then they'll start paying off like principal and interest on the WIFIA loan, and we'll ramp up the WIFIA repayments once the SRF is fully paid off. So that's what that means. So we try to backload it so you're not paying full WIFIA and SRF at the same time. If that's something that you're interested in, sometimes folks just want to stack them on top of one another, and that's fine. But the WIFIA one, we can't wait until you pay off the SRF one and then start the 35-year clock. If I'm understanding that question correctly.
Right, that makes sense. From Michael, could a state take a WIFIA loan out to make a revolving fund or grant program for decentralized replacement?
Oh, someone has asked me this before.
Yeah.
I don't think it was you, Michael, but yeah, we've gotten questions like this before. We have never done that, and it would be a little complex, but theoretically, our lawyer says that we could do that.
Okay.
We'd have a lot of things to work out, but yeah, that would be a very interesting thing to try and do.
And I will chime in that it's possible with SRF money too, at least on the clean water side. There's been borrowers who have taken, like, for instance, the Spokane Conservation District in Washington takes SRF loans, and they kind of operate their own revolving loan fund where they'll loan that money out to farmers for like cover crops. And then they bring that back into Spokane, and then they pay it back to the SRF, and it's been going for like 20 years now. And there's other examples too. I'd be happy to chat about that if anyone wants to email me, but yeah.
Drinking water, I am not sure about that.
Michael added a smiley face, so I think maybe it was him. Great. Okay, folks, I think, oh, there's another one. Got another one. There's always one more. All right. When do we reach out to SWIFIA, SWIFIA versus WIFIA for a loan consultation and application?
Good question. And I didn't know who was going to be on the webinar, so I left both references. The majority of folks, well, at EPA, it's the same people. So if you want to talk about WIFIA or SWIFIA, it would be me. It's the same team. The WIFIA program implements both programs. And the majority of folks who get loans from us are going through the WIFIA program, which is our base program where we can provide loans to like public and private entities, typically water systems, counties, cities, regional entities. The SWIFIA program is a little, well, it's not little, but it's a pot of money that we set aside, and it's specifically dedicated for SRFs to come in and get loans from us that they can use as a way to supplement the fund. Like Allison said, some of them will go to the bond market. They can also come to WIFIA to get more funding so they can make more loans to communities, or they could come to us instead of the bond market. They could do both. They could do a wide variety of things, but that's what SWIFIA is for. You're only going to talk to us about SWIFIA if you are an SRF program, like the state agency that implements the SRF. Everyone else, you're going to want to talk to me about WIFIA.
Great, thank you. Natalie wanted some clarification. Are there any benefits to applying for WIFIA funds directly instead of borrowing from the state revolving funds? Are WIFIA funds normally sought after only if the SRFs can't fully fund a project?
No. Sometimes, and again, a lot of times, like some of the states that we do a lot of co-funding with, they will say, we'll fund 30% of the project, or we'll give you this much money, then go to the WIFIA program and get as much as you can, and then bonds will have to do the rest because they have cap limits. But we have folks who come to us regularly just because they like the flexibilities that we offer. And they have told us that we are good to work with, typically work fast, and they like the team. And again, they like the financial flexibility. So like we just made our 5th loan to King County, Washington, which is like a AAA rated borrower, and they go to the market a lot, but they also like coming to WIFIA because of the flexibilities that they can utilize and saving on interest. So a lot of times they'll use like short-term construction financing during construction, save WIFIA until the end. That way they didn't accrue interest for like 5 years and then draw it out at the end. So some of our bigger borrowers are frequent flyers to WIFIA. You know, they come to us for that option with the interest savings.
Great, thanks. We have another question from Jamie. How does EPA handle cost overruns or scope changes after loan closing?
Good questions. So I'm assuming since you said EPA, you're talking about WIFIA, but I'll go first. So cost overruns, once we close the loan, we can't change the loan amount. So what we try to do ahead of time is, you know, you submit your letter of interest, you decide to apply, you submit an application. If the dollar amount you're requesting changes between LOI and application, that's fine. We'll adjust the application amount. And then typically, like, you are going to have your own contingency for the project built in to the total project costs. And then, you know, based on the type of project, how far you are in planning and design, the type of like technology you're using, is it a more traditional project? Is this something more innovative? And in consultation with you, the borrower, we will add a WIFIA contingency on top of that. Again, because once we close the loan, you will have to submit another letter of interest if you're like, oh, we need $40 million more dollars. We can't increase the loan $40 million. You would have to submit another letter of interest to get a new loan for $40 million. And again, the loans are also an up to amount. So if you don't end up needing that extra contingency, you don't draw it down, you didn't accrue interest on it, but it's there if you need it. And then, you know, we found a lot of folks, like, we're typically doing bigger projects. So a lot of things change between now and 5 years from now. And so a lot of folks end up using that contingency anyway. But again, if you don't need it, you don't draw it down. And then for project scope changes, those are typically something that we can accommodate after the loan closes. So again, costs are always changing. So sometimes we have folks who get a loan for 5 projects, but because of cost overruns, they can only fund 3 of those. We can make that adjustment and we'll just fund the 3 of them. Or if you have 5 projects and let's say you found a grant for one of the projects, so you have like $15 million grant for this project 5, but you want to use that $15 million in WIFIA funding, we can talk about adding a project or projects that add up to $15 million, as long as they're within the scope of like what you're working on in the loan. We can usually add a project or projects, that way you can maximize the loan amount that you have. So I think that answers your question. So it's not something that we can guarantee, but it's something we usually can accommodate because we know that projects change, especially when they have such long construction timeframes.
All right. Next one is a co-funding question from Aaron. Can you all provide an example of other funding programs that you all see being used with your programs, commonly seen partnered with your programs?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I'm unmuted, so I'll just keep talking. I'm just going to keep talking until somebody stops me. But WIFIA, again, SRF is the most common one. Some of our borrowers are also using bonds. We see out in the West, a lot of Bureau of Reclamation. I think it's Title 16 grants, like the Water Smart. So for like water recycling projects, a lot of times we're co-funding with them. Congressionally directed spending. We see some of our projects have a couple $1 million from those grants. I've still seen some that have some ARPA funding. Those are the most common ones I can think of for WIFIA. But I'll let John and Allison talk about. I think you have a couple different ones for SRF.
Yeah, the ones that come to my mind are some USDA loans, just for small systems.
Rural development at USDA, I think, is a lot, and CDBG. And then I think a lot of state grants are often paired with the SRFs too. Folks are looking for as much free grant money as they can get, so then putting kind of filling out a funding package with those.
Great. And Allison shared a resource that,
right? Oh, sorry, Jess.
I was just going to say, I threw it into the participant chat. Allison shared case studies that show a lot of the co-funding sources with a link there. Go ahead, Dallas.
Oh, I was just going to ask Allison, on the clean water side, I think it's maybe both SRFs, but I think on the clean water side, you do a lot with FEMA also, right?
Yeah, we have an MOU with FEMA, so we'll often see that as well.
Great. Monica asked, why would SRFs take a loan from SWIFIA versus taking out a bond? Why would an SRF take a loan from SWIFIA versus taking out a bond?
Yeah. That's a good question. It's flexibility can be a good reason. But we're not, honestly, we don't see a lot of interest from SRFs over the past couple of years, just because the rates have been higher, and SRFs are very highly rated entities. So they can get bonds for a good rate already. And then there could be, if they have to monitor their projects, and then they have to do some sort of monitoring for the bonds, and then another type of monitoring for the WIFIA projects, that can create more work for them. I don't know all of the specifics, but there are some financial flexibilities in the SWIFIA lending program that might not exist in the bond market. And so I can share, so we have done some SWIFIA loans in New Jersey and Indiana. I can share those. I just have to find the fact sheet, but I can put them in the chat.
That would be great. And Dallas, if you want a minute to look for that, Nikolai had a great addition here. Nikolai said, other key WIFIA benefits are the ability to lock in rates, ability to demonstrate funding for those who need to demonstrate full funding for awarding contracts without incurring borrowing costs until borrowing is actually needed, flexible terms, and accommodating and helpful staff.
Thank you, Nikolai. We appreciate Nikolai very much.
Oh, okay. So free endorsement, free advertising right there. All right, I got a question from Jamie. How does WIFIA work with corporate stewardship funding that implements a water benefit accounting method? Have you seen co-funders be corporations?
I've seen co-funders be corporations. Just thinking through some of the projects. I have not. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist and that we couldn't do it. I can't think about all of the co-funding for all 150 projects. So if you, I will say again, because I can't think of one off the top of my head, but if you have a specific example, feel free to send me an email, and I'm happy to to noodle it more, and I can chat with some of our underwriters if it's something, their thoughts on it. A lot of times we'll bounce ideas off. There's a lot of things we haven't seen, but that hypothetically we can do if folks want to do them. So yeah, if it's like a specific project you actually have in mind or a potential co-funder, feel free to send me an email.
Great. Rebecca asks, what kind of non-traditional sources of repayment have you seen? Have you seen grants used as a source of repayment of loans?
I can start for SRF. Well, for SRF, that's usually the biggest burden. I mean for loans, I mean WIFIA probably too, but is you need an identified source of repayment when you're coming in. So for something that doesn't have rates coming in, like municipalities treatment plant or like sewer rates, it's really hard to find repayment. But we've seen folks use like HOAs, HOA fees. We've had public parks come to us and use like their fees that they're taking in at the parks for bathrooms or membership fees, hunting fees for some places. Really, SRFs will work with folks to be able to find a repayment system, but there's also innovative financing mechanisms with a lot of the SRFs too that will help folks work with programs that alleviate repayment. For instance, something that a few states do called sponsorship is where a utility will take on a higher balance for their loan with a reduced interest rate, and then that delta of money in between will be offset for like a wetlands project or like a land project that then doesn't have that repayment coming in. So an example that I could give is Ohio. I'll put a link to our fact sheet in the chat here about that, but yeah.
Oh, and for WIFIA, I mean, I think honestly that Allison has more unique and creative repayment sources for the SRFs, especially through like the non-point source or ag BMP projects than we've probably seen. We typically are seeing like water, sewer revenue, general obligations, sometimes like a stormwater revenue or a special tax. You know, we can do project finance transactions. And so like where there is no repayment stream and the project, successful completion of the project is going to generate the repayment stream. And so we're working on at least one like that. And so that's as interesting or creative as I can think of for us right now.
Great. I have a two-part question for John and Allison. How frequently do states run out of allocated SRF funding? And how do I make my project higher ranked?
That's a good question. I think you would have to work with your state on having to get your project higher ranked. And running out of funds, I am not aware of that. I haven't heard of any state running out of DWSRF funds in my time.
Yeah, me neither. And I would say check the state website for the project priority list, but it's always good just to give them a call or an email. There's staff working on that. And maybe if it's something that the state would change, if more folks have, say they don't fund decentralized systems for the Clean Water SRF, if no one's coming in for it, they won't know that the demand is there for that. And maybe they would change their program to be able to do that. So I say always call your SRF. Or you can contact me and I can put you in contact with the right person. And then Zoe just put the link in for our non-traditional projects paper that goes over a lot of the non-traditional finance repayment sources that borrowers have used and examples of some of like the niche financing mechanisms that have been used to reach like non-treatment plant, like non-great infrastructure that is still eligible under the Clean Water SRF. So it's really cool stuff. So give that a look.
Great, thank you. All right, we're caught up on questions, so we'll do a last call for questions while Zoe helps disseminate this information and these links. I'll take this quick minute to thank the three of you, Dallas, Allison, and John. Thank you so much. Clearly there is a great demand for your knowledge and all this information, seeing as we've had so many great questions today. So I really appreciate your time and your willingness to be with us today. Yeah, I think we might have reached the end of the questions. So I'm going to turn it back over to Zoe, and she has some wrap-up information and logistics for us.
Thank you. So huge thank you to Dallas, Allison, and John for sharing their expertise with us today. Following this webinar, you will receive a follow-up email with the slides from today and a link to the recording. We also ask that you complete the webinar evaluation following the webinar so that you can let us know your thoughts on today's session, as this helps us plan future webinars on topics important to you. I'm going to also go ahead and share our YouTube link in the chat. Today's webinar will be added shortly, but not quite yet. And you can also see all of our past EFCN webinar recordings there. So we encourage you to check those out. Thank you again, and we hope to see you at future EFCN events. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.